Okay, let's continue with the Kuzari, gentlemen. We are covering the section in the first part of the Kuzari where the king asked the rabbi to tell him how did Judaism disseminate, how did it start. It must have started with a small group of individuals that created the pillars or the major beliefs and structure of the religion. And then they convinced others, they spread the word. And then at some point, the followers had political power, and they used the power of the state and the military to spread the religion. And if you're wondering where did they come up with that, that's essentially how the spread of Christianity and Islam developed. And the rabbi said, Judaism doesn't work that way. Judaism began exactly like creation. Poof. There wasn't a process over years, decades, where it's spreading from a nucleus, small group that are going from door to door talking about Moses, but rather it became an instant religion of the Jewish people. And that instant was Har Sinai. When God revealed himself to the Jewish people in Har Sinai, that's when Judaism began. So whatever religion existed at the time of Adam HaRishon, or at the time of Noah, or Avraham Avinu, or Yitzchak Avinu, or Yaakov Avinu, it always remained small. It never sort of took off. Avraham Avinu, we know, was Megayer, bringing people closer to Hashem, teaching them about God, the creator of the universe, through his acts of chesed. And Yitzchak Avinu followed his footsteps. With Yaakov, it seems that Yaakov had a different model. Yaakov Avinu decided that the way to really take their emunah, their belief system, to the next level is to create a kollel. That is a nucleus of a family, that family would maintain close relationship with Hashem, with God. And that's what was preserved in Egypt. But it wasn't what we call Judaism today. And so we continue. And he says that all the miraculous events, and we talked about, if you remember, the plagues in Egypt, that they had a certain structure. They were moving from water to earth to vegetation to animals to bodies, human bodies, and then human souls. All this progression was a sign. And they understood that there is something divine that is running the world. And that they were directly connected to Ha'inyan Eloki. And the rabbi said they moved to the desert when there's no food. And through the miracle of the man, they were sustained throughout the 40 years in their desert. And then we have Shabbos. There's something that from the divine perspective, there is a day that is revealed to them in the desert that they will not be getting the man on Shabbat. There's something about the day that they are beginning to recognize. Says the rabbi that the holiness of Shabbos was not only revealed to them through the miracle of the man, but also through the 6 days of creation. Right? God created the universe, the world, in 6 days. And what did he do on the seventh? Rested. And so, he said all of these things up to the Mount Sinai left one doubt in everybody's mind. Does God speak to people directly? They saw the miracles, they saw what we call hashgacha pratis, divine providence, where God is leading them, protecting them, guarding them. But there was a question, does God speak to people? The fact that up to now God is speaking to Moses, to Moshe Rabbeinu, that wasn't necessarily evidence. Or if it is an argument or evidence, but it's not a proof. And so, says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, maybe we could say that the Torah is simply a product of human mind. And that a person has in mind these teachings. And once he has them, he receives help from God. And they understood that emunah is something spiritual. It's not something physical. And therefore, well, I misspoke. They understood that they believed that what is spiritual, which is not physical, can speak to human beings, was something that they weren't sure about. We know that human beings can speak, correct? How do you know that? Because you speak, and you hear other people speak. You're experiencing that all the time. Up to now, they didn't experience this. God didn't speak to any of them in Mitzrayim or outside of Mitzrayim. The interaction that Hashem has with them is through events, but there's no direct communication. It's true that Hashem is speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu, but that's not for them. And so, for them, speech is a physical act. It's Gashmias. And if God is spiritual, God is not Gashmias, God is not physical, then how does one bridge the gap? I'm not saying mechanically speaking. I'm talking about theologically speaking. That is, for them to accept that God does communicate to people. And so, God wanted to remove this doubt from their hearts. Therefore, Hashem commands them through Moses, through Moshe Rabbeinu, to prepare themselves both physically to be pure and spiritually to be pure. So they are separated from their wives. They have to prepare their heart to hear the words of God. They were mekadesh themselves, they prepared themselves to the madrega that they would what? They would be ra'ui, they would be appropriate to receive prophecy. There are steps that individuals could learn how to take in order to prepare oneself to receive prophecy. Whether that person then receives prophecy or not depends on Hashem. Person can be fully prepared. A tzaddik, he did tikkun aguf, tikkun amidot, the pure intellect, all these things. But it still might not get, because Hashem doesn't want to. You can't force Hashem to speak to you. But in this case, it's coming from the Kadosh Baruch Hu telling them, prepare yourselves. And so they're preparing themselves for 3 days. And it's not only that they are preparing to receive prophecy, which is just a message, they are preparing themselves to hear Hashem panim el panim, that God would speak to them directly. So after 3 days, there are thunder and lightning, earthquake, fire that is surrounding the mountain. And that fire continued to be on the mountain even after Har Sinai. And they saw that Moshe Rabbeinu is going into this fire and coming out of the fire. These are the examples that he gave on prophets. Remember, we talked about qualitative differences. There are, right, minerals and rocks. Then we have vegetations, animals, humans. And then he said there's another category of a prophet. He can do things with his physical status that other human beings cannot. And so, God hears divine speech explicitly in the Ten Commandments. Now, we are more familiar with the position that they only heard the first 2 commandments. But there is an opinion in Chazal that all 10 of them they heard. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is holding that position here in this section. So, they heard the 10 commandments, and the 10 commandments, or the 10 utterances to be more correct, Aseret HaDibrot, are categories. They're 10 categories of commandments. And among them is also the warning to keep Shabbos. Right? It's part of the 10 utterances, the commandments. Right? You're looking at me like you never heard this before. You okay? Now they already, just so you know, they already received some commands about Shabbat in Mara when they were starting to get the man. But it's only in the Aseret HaDibros that they are getting the real deal. So now what? Everybody received this. Not just individuals. They did not hear it from another human being. They heard it directly from God. And they certainly did not have the spiritual ability to receive the message the same way that Moshe Rabbeinu received. We know that. But they received something. And from that point onwards, the Jewish people believed that God is speaking directly to Moshe Rabbeinu. They had no doubt anymore, because they experienced God speaking to them. And they knew that God does speak to people, just like He spoke to them. And they understood that the madrega that Moshe Rabbeinu is holding is much higher than them. And the Gemara says in Masechet Shabbos, around Daf Pei Tes, I think it's Amud Beis, that they couldn't handle anymore. They said, listen, Moshe Rabbeinu, you speak to them. You speak to Hashem. Just, we can't handle the spiritual power that is coming down from Hashem to us. So you bring it down to us. And Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, they did good. Don't be mad at them. They understood their level, they understood the madrega, and let's accept it. And it was a good thing, which is a sign for us. We should all know our madregas. There's certain things that spiritually you can do, and certain things you can't. Right? It's like swimming. Some people decide they're going to swim the Kinneret. Then somehow in the middle, they need help. So, yeah, you might be able to do a few laps, but that's a little different. Okay. And so, now the rabbi takes on the philosophical view of prophecy. And it's important to keep this idea in mind, that there is a model among medieval philosophers that explains prophecy naturally. It is a natural occurring phenomenon if you just follow the steps that the philosophers tell you. If you start with this and you do this plus this plus this plus this plus this, you get it. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevi already told us they don't have prophecy. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had all these opinions. This one says this one says that. They argue amongst themselves. You don't find in philosophy prophets. You have people who have very smart ideas. They do discover truths about reality. We're not going to deny that, chas v'shalom. And so Rabbi Yehuda Halevi here now begins an explanation of philosophy from a natural perspective. And if it's a little odd for you or you're not familiar with all the terms, feel free to interrupt me, and I will happily explain it to you again. So the philosophers thought that prophecy is something that comes to a person from within, that if the person purifies his nefesh, that he has achieved a high level of perfection of his intellect, and his intellect connects itself to the sechel hapoel, the active or agent intellect. I'm going to explain what that is in a second. So once a person can do that, then he receives, says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, some people call it Ruach HaKodesh. Who's that? The Christians. Some people call it Malach Gavriel, the angel Gabriel. Who says that? The Muslims. They claim that Muhammad's prophecy all came from Gabriel. Right? That the angel came to him in the cave and so, I'm sorry?
Could you call it a prophecy if it came from another source?
Again, we are understanding that there's such a concept as natural prophecy. That is, if you follow the teachings, the directives of the philosophers, and achieve both or three types of perfection: tikkun haguf, repair of your body; tikkun nefesh, which includes the midot; and tikkun seichel, your intellect. You will connect to the sechel hapoel, and then you will receive what they call is prophecy.
Is that parallel to children who were in like prophecy schools?
No, mapito.
So how did they know? Like they were children, right? They were kept children.
You're asking about the Jewish kids, the kinderlach.
Yeah.
How did that work as opposed to this?
They had schools of probably how did that?
First of all, I'm not so sure that they were kids.
No.
No. Why do you assume that they're kids?
I thought it said somewhere that they took them from a young age and they would teach them.
Can, but it's not something that they. When somebody went to a Novi school, okay, and you got your certificate, in the end you get your, you're a Novi now. That doesn't mean you become a Novi. Because it's not automatic. If a Kadosh Baruch Hu wants to give you a prophecy, he'll give it to you. But if he doesn't, he won't. But if you didn't, now there's a whole argument. There is a machlekes rishonim found in the Moire by the Rambam and also the Abarbanel. There's a big machlekes whether you have to reach a certain level in order to become a prophet, or can Hashem give prophecy to whomever he chooses. So if he chooses Dovi, boom, trach, he's a prophet. If he chooses Baruch, boom. Yeah. I think that what we should do is whoever is asleep in the shir, the camera should focus on the person, And that way, leave him alone, leave him alone. He's up all night. We're trying to keep you up, Al. Tov. So, the seichel, this ancient intellect, will help the person reach understanding. He says that type of person, the philosophers say, that in his imagination, during that time, whether it's through a dream, whether he is sort of in this alternate consciousness, he would imagine, I'm very careful, I'm choosing my words very carefully, would imagine that some being is speaking to him, or that he would hear his words, but he doesn't hear it in his ears, but it's inside his nefesh. And he will see it, but he will not see it with his eyes. He will see it only in his mind, and he claims that that comes from God. It's a claim that the individual is making. That we are not denying the experience that the individual is reporting. What we're arguing is against the interpretation of that experience. Right? When a person is sitting in a basement with a few other friends having l'chaims and they pull out the Ouija board, do we say now that they're communicating with the dead? No, come on. Click, click, click. So what are they experiencing? Okay, that we can have an argument about. But that is not what nevuah is according to the Torah. So, Eliyahu is asking a very good question. So how do we know the difference? So, I'm not going to speak about the individual cases. I want to give you a general answer. Once the Torah was revealed through this mass revelation event, it set a standard that all prophecy cannot contradict the prophetic message that God brought down to humanity. If your prophetic message contradicts what? The Tanakh, right? Once we have others. Once the Tanakh was sealed, sorry, you're out.
So no go for Muhammad.
Yeah. Not only Muhammad. No go for even any, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to get that radical. But we had other individuals in Jewish history that claimed to have God communicated to them. We don't want to mention names. And the question is, are they within the boundaries of the Torah or they're out? If their entire message is that redemption shall be reached through sin, Shabbat Shalom, we're done. Close the doors and we're out of here. We're not listening to this. It's ridiculous. That is, we have a canon. Do you know what the word canon means? A measuring stick. The word canon means a measuring stick. We measure prophecies to what was revealed to us. If it's congruent, if it agrees with what the Torah says, let's keep going. If it contradicts what the Torah says, no go. Gemara. When you come, the Torah tells us, God says, I will send prophets to you. But you are not allowed to add anything to the Torah or detract from the Torah. So when you have a prophet or somebody who claims to be a prophet that says, by the way, the mitzvahs are finished. We got a new deal going on. You don't have to do the mitzvahs anymore. You don't need to circumcise. You don't need to eat kosher. You don't need to wear tzitzis. You don't need to keep Shabbos. You want to, you can. Well, whatever. Then we know it's done. The conversation's over. If the person who comes claims that the holy text that we have for the last 3,500 years is corrupt and it's false, then automatically we don't listen to him. There's nothing to talk about. Doesn't matter what his first name is. Now, he says, again, we are not arguing, that's what the Rabbi explains to this king. We're not arguing against the experience that the person is telling us. He's saying the angel Gabriel spoke to him. We're not saying he didn't. We're not saying he didn't. It doesn't matter. The question is, how are we interpreting the message? What is the interpretation? The fact that he had some sort of experience, you're not going to deny that, because you really can't. How can you deny to somebody that he's telling you, this is what I experienced? Remember, I went into my room, I closed the door, yeah, there was nobody in there, yeah. And then this tremendous light appeared, and this man wearing all white spoke to me, and he told me to shave my head and play drums in the airport. You guys don't know that it used to be a whole big thing, Hare Krishnas. It was like a big, they would be everywhere.
What is a Hare Krishna? Like Buddhist kind of?
Hindu.
I actually met an Israeli one at my university at the time.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back home.
So, continues the Kuzari, and he says all of these svaras are false. Why? Because they are veering off from Ma'amad Har Sinai. We had Ma'amad Har Sinai. We saw what it is. We know what it is. And therefore, he says that once it came down, that God gave us the Torah, right? The 10 commandments with the tablets, and gave them to Moshe. And the Jewish people saw it, and they heard it, and they had the Aron HaKodesh, where they put it in there, and there was a Mishkan, and the Mishkan existed for 900 years. 900 years. How old are you? 20. Imagine what 900 years are. Right? You're sitting there going, when is this year over? Imagine 900 years. And so, only when the Jewish people sinned against Hashem and Nebuchadnezzar came from Bavel, the Aron was nignaz, was hidden, and the Jewish people were taken into exile by Nebuchadnezzar. Until then, we had the Aron HaKodesh. Just imagine that. Nobody would have ever doubted Ma'amad Har Sinai. It's like, hey, look. And they had the jar of the man next to it. Yirmiyahu Hanavi says, here, look, you remember the man? He had it in a jar. First of all, there's no evidence for the man because, enough.
Was it also hidden along with everything else?
Yeah.
Who hid it?
That's a whole machlokes of what exactly happened to that stuff. But it's gone. So if you see on eBay, man jar found recently in the desert in Iraq, only $4.99. While supplies last. That's not it. Worms included. That's not it. 900 years, the Mishkan. You had the Aron of the Mishkan, the Aron HaKodesh, all of it. So the Kuzari, the king, after listening to all of this, says, your story, your recounting of God speaking to the Jewish people and giving you tablets, it means that we can't blame you for how you portray God. Because that was the experience that you've received. Because whatever the Torah says and whatever we are saying about what happened, that's what we received. So you can't complain to me like, no, listen, this is what I was told. My father told me. And his father told him. And so he says, you are correct in jettisoning, throwing away logic and reason. So the rabbi, if we did a play, the rabbi would give him such a look like, what? What are you talking about? God forbid, he says, for us to accept things that are impossible and what the intellect rejects and what sense perception tells us is not true. We accept the data that the senses bring us. We trust that what we see with our eyes is correct. And we trust what we hear is correct. Now, you have to factor out, for example, if you take a stick and put it in the water. Have you ever looked at the stick in the water? What does it look like? It looks like it broke. Right? Refracted. So there's certain things you have to sort of factor that the eyes show you. You have to say, yeah, it's because of that the light is hitting the water. But we trust our sense perception to tell us about this reality. We're not denying it. Also, we do believe that the tool that God gave us to understand the Torah is reason. That's why the Torah, the Gemara, is based on logical reasoning. When we have a kasha, we try to answer. If it doesn't deal with logic, right? There's no point. We're all learning, right? A zoeg get leishto, right? So you have to say she, zoeg get leishto, megureshet. Why? Because of the trumpet. What? What trumpet? What are you talking about? So, there is a rational discussion that's occurring. The pasuk says, "V'nosan biyada." He gave her in her hand, right? So the Mishnah says zoyrek. So we ask, is zoyrek a type of netina? Is throwing a get similar to giving the get? So we say, yeah, it's a type of giving. Okay, yad. What about the yad? The chatzer. So then, what quality? Right? It's all involves reasoning. And also, we reject things that are silly. God takes human form. That's silly. God gave a document that expires. Why? That's silly. So the Kuzari tells us that, gentlemen, with the prophecy, with everything we receive from the Kadosh Baruch Hu, we are not letting go the tools that Hashem blessed us with to understand His world. We trust sensory data. We have to verify, we have to learn how to use it correctly. Sometimes it is possible not to hear right and hear something muffled and you have to clear it. Yeah, but essentially we trust what we are experiencing with our senses. And so he says, the first commandment or the first utterance in the 10 Commandments or the Aseret HaDibros, when we were commanded to what? Emunah be'Elokah, believing in God. Right? What's the second one? Not having false gods and not have something called shituf. Shituf is what?
It's like fragmentation of God, splitting God. What is it?
Shituf means that we're adding other powers that are co-powerful.
Like
Shituf. And we are warned by God there not to imagine God in any way through idols. No drawings, no statues, no, what's that stuff that people do now? What was that app you sent me, Alan, to make up the photos? AI? No, but there's a name for that.
Dream.
No, that's the name of the app.
GPT.
No.
Deepfake.
No,
Journey? Something?
No, never
Mid-journey?
mind.
Mid-journey? Yeah.
like when you make up photos, what do you call that?
Well,
There's a term for that.
AI-generated photos.
Photoshop. Yeah, you can't like.
No. It is an AI thing. I think.
I know it is, but AI can do a lot of
There's
things.
a famous one called Mid-Journey. It could like make a Picasso unique thing for you.
Yeah, you can type in what for it to make, and then
It just makes it.
Yeah. So,
Mid-Journey is a popular one.
so
like you can make them short.
we're not allowed to try to provide an image of God at all. Which means what? We distance God completely from physicality. Claiming that God is physical is what? Irrational. He says, no, the whole point of Judaism is that we are using our reason. We don't just believe in anything. There's the best example that I saw on rational interpretation of the Torah. It's a very small example. You might not be very impressed, but I was impressed, and I'll tell you why. The example is like this. The Pasuk says in the beginning in Bereshis that Eve, Chava, is Em Kol Chai. Literally, it means the mother of all living things. Okay? Rav Sadia Gaon says, you can't learn that, meaning living things. What? Eve is now the mother of cows and chickens and whales and a fly and a mosquito. No. He says it's reasonable to say that she's the mother of human beings. That's what it means here. Which means that you have to use your seichel to understand what Hashem is speaking to you. Because Hashem gave you the Torah knowing that you have a seichel. Not that you're some sort of a, automaton. Not thinking. Well, it says here, so it must be that that's what it is. God has legs. What's next? Does he have a beard too and his nose is red? Because Vaychar Af means the nose got red, got hot. But it's an expression to say that is angry. Okay. And so the rabbi continues. We have to elevate God beyond physicality from a kal v'chomer. Because for us, we know that we are made up of a rational soul. And that is not physical. So kal v'chomer, if we recognize it in ourselves, that it must be that God is at least that. Right? It's much greater. Obviously, there's no comparison to the human soul. But if we can recognize that you have a neshama, for sure, you have to distance all of Gashmias from the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And so he says, in the same way that our neshama speaks to us, it doesn't use the mouth, right? If that happens, they call that like multiple personality syndrome. I mean, that's like, I'm not talking about a ventriloquist. But the neshama speaks, communicates. Some people are more attuned to it, some people are less attuned to it. And we could see that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to communicate with God, not in the same way that he communicates with the Jewish people. It's a different form of back and forth. Okay, so tomorrow, Ibn Hashem, we'll talk about divine speech. What does that mean that God spoke? And how did that work? Thank you. We continue tomorrow.